G'day, welcome to Pellowe Talk. I'm Dave Pellowe, and today I'm at the Queensland University of Technology, and I'm sitting down with Dr Alex Deagon, Senior Lecturer of the School of Law here in the Gardens Point campus. Thank you for joining me, Alex.
Thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a beautiful campus here in the heart of the CBD and next to the Botanical Gardens.
Yeah, the scenery is beautiful. Unfortunately, it's very hot today.
It is a slightly warm day today.
You might be sweating a bit.
Lots of humidity and not so much breeze.
No.
So, yeah. Now, you were published last year in the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy. That's
Yes.
quite an achievement. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm very interested in what that article was about.
So in that article, I basically engaged in a critique of a philosopher named John Rawls and one of his works, Political Liberalism. So the basic idea of Rawls's political liberalism is that certain contested, what he calls reasonable comprehensive doctrines, should not contribute to public policy. So in particular, the focus was on religious doctrines, so Christianity, Islam, Judaism, whatever it might be, and particular religious appeals as a justification for public policy. So Rawls essentially, along with others, argue that these kinds of reasonable comprehensive doctrines, and particularly religious doctrines, shouldn't be allowed into public policy because they're divisive. Not everyone accepts the authority of, say, the religious text, and so therefore if any religious person wants to make a contribution to public policy, they have to frame that contribution in secular terms. So my critique of that was first of all, even though it appears neutral to say that everyone has to frame their public policy arguments in secular terms, and it applies the same to everybody, that it actually is in a sense unfair and discriminatory against religious citizens who may want to frame their public policy in religious terms. So even though it appears to be neutral, it actually directly excludes or targets particular religious doctrines indiscriminately. And in conjunction with that, I argue that the idea that the secular is neutral is actually wrong. The idea of the secular is not neutral. It is in fact based on a number of metaphysical, in some cases theological assumptions. So it's not neutral, it's a particular partisan way of approaching the relations between religion and the state. And so what I argue is that religious citizens should be entitled to frame their public policy contributions in their own terms, the way they want to. They can use secular arguments if they want, if they view that to be more effective, but they can also appeal to religious arguments. And fundamentally, I called into question the neutrality of a purely secular framing of public policy debates.
So this philosopher, Rawls?
Yes.
He obviously has a problem with... To me, it sounds like he obviously has a problem with Christianity or religion generally. That he's seeking to somehow validate a premise upon which he seeks to exclude viewpoints he disagrees with.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that somebody with a fervent faith in God would be arguing that faith should be excluded from public debate.
That's actually a matter of some scholarly debate as to what kind of faith, if any, John Rawls had.
Right.
So I mean, his aim, his professed aim, was to figure out a neutral way to kind of regulate debates in politics and public policy in a way that would be kind of acceptable for everyone.
It's not beyond belief that a Christian would argue the exclusion of Christianity. However, this being the first time I've heard of him and that argument, what it seems to me is that if Christianity and religion in general is something that's brought into an argument, surely the risk is that you're simply unpersuasive, that the merits of your argument fail to convince anybody that you're right about the better direction for society and public policy.
Yeah.
That if anything, it's a liability for the person bearing those arguments. Is there a scenario in which it's an unfair advantage?
So, something that a lot of scholars in this area have identified is that the one reason why compelling religious believers to only frame their arguments in secular terms, one reason that's unfair is because many religious believers may not have the sophistication to frame their particular religious perspectives in purely secular terms. But that shouldn't be a reason from excluding them from contributing.
I actually meant my question in the other way.
I'm getting to that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. But another reason that it's viewed as problematic is because there are certain issues that touch upon metaphysics, life and death, those sorts of things, which we don't have a good secular account of. So things like the beginning and end of life, so say abortion and euthanasia, or same-sex marriage as a different issue. Those sorts of really strongly moral policy questions. There's no real robust secular account of those things. I mean, there are attempts, obviously, but even some secular and secularist scholars have acknowledged that there may be no good secular reasons for a particular policy, but there may be good religious reasons, and those should be taken into account.
Yeah, brilliant. Let's move on to section 116 of the Australian Constitution.
Yes.
Just summarise for those of us who are not familiar with what that is. It's essentially our, I believe, First Amendment, equivalent to America's First Amendment, the non-establishment clause.
So in terms of the text of Section 116, it's quite similar to the American First Amendment. And in fact, the framers drew from the American First Amendment when drafting that section, which is why it's so similar. But in fact, our High Court has interpreted the section quite differently from the American First Amendment. So the text of the section says that the Commonwealth shall not have power to make laws to prohibit free exercise of religion, establish a religion, impose a religious observance, and no religious test shall be allowed for any kind of public office under the Commonwealth. So four parts to it, which are called the four clauses. A couple of key things about it is that it doesn't apply to the states. It only limits Commonwealth legislative power. So the states can essentially make any laws about religion that they like. So they can establish a religion.
They can establish the Church of Queensland.
Yes, they can establish the Church of Queensland, or they could directly, say, restrict the freedoms of religious believers.
Isn't there you've just said it's not, but my understanding was that there was a requirement of state laws to be consistent with the Constitution.
There's a requirement for state laws to be consistent with the Constitution, yes, but where the Constitution doesn't limit state power in any particular area, then the states can make laws about anything they like, essentially. And there is no limit on the state's ability to make laws about religious freedom, at least explicitly. Yep. So in principle, of course, politically no state would ever do it, but in principle, it would...
Theoretically.
Yeah, theoretically. It would be possible for the states...
Not conceivably in this generation.
Yeah, it would be possible for the states to make laws about religious issues. The other thing about Section 116 is that it's different from the First Amendment in the sense that it's not a right that's actionable by an individual. So, for example, if a particular person restricted my religious freedom in some way, I wouldn't be able to appeal to the Constitution in the same way that an American citizen would be able to appeal to a breach of their First Amendment rights.
So very similar to free speech. It's not a restriction on private property or individuals. It's a restriction on the government intervening in your rights, but only the government.
Only the Commonwealth, yes, that's right.
Very good. So, is it in any way a positive right?
So, in the sense that we've just discussed, not really. So the closest thing to it would be the free exercise clause. So that prevents the Commonwealth from making laws that would prohibit or restrict the free exercise of religion. But it's not. But it's essentially a negative right in the sense that it's a power to stop the government from doing something.
Yeah.
It's not. It doesn't give or provide directly religious freedom to individuals.
So let's segue to the undefinition of marriage,
Sure.
because it seems incredibly relevant that there's now great fear and concern amongst religious schools and religious denominations and even private business owners, photographers, bakers, etc., that the new status quo of an unbiblical definition of marriage is going to compel behaviour which is not consistent with the free exercise of religion.
Yes.
So speak to that.
Yeah, so, I mean, the ironic thing here, of course, were the claims of those who are advocating for same-sex marriage that it would have no impact on religious freedom or anything else. They said it was just a furphy that the objectors were trying to use to stop the change. But, of course, we now see that was either highly disingenuous and deceptive, or people saying that were just ignorant, or possibly both.
A lot of both.
So
a lot of both.
We've already seen some moves to curtail the religious freedom of particularly religious educational institutions, and the justification for these moves are that Australia voted to legalise marriage equality, and we don't want to enshrine more inequality or discrimination in our laws, and in fact our laws should reflect the fact that we voted for equality. So despite saying that same-sex marriage would have no impact on religious freedom, same-sex marriage is being used as a justification to restrict religious freedom, which is deemed as promoting discrimination. Is
it a stretch at all to say that these new laws contravene the free exercise clause of 116?
There are some who believe that they do. The problem that anyone...
Credibly?
Well, the problem that anyone making that argument would have is that the High Court has interpreted Section 116 very narrowly. And so what they've said in effect is that unless a law directly targets free exercise in its terms, so the law explicitly says, this person shall not exercise their religion in this way, or something like that, then only then will the law be invalid. But if a general law...
But if the effect is thus...
Well, the
free pass.
Yeah, even if the effect is to restrict religious freedom, the majority of the High Court's most recent decision stated that this will not be enough to invalidate the law, which I think is a very problematic interpretation.
Yeah, indeed.
Very
revisionist.
Yes. So if there were to be a case run which challenged the amendments to the Marriage Act on the basis that it contravened Section 116, there would have to be arguments that High Court precedent is wrong and should be changed. And I think there are good arguments to say that that precedent is wrong. And in fact, I've written on this issue that that interpretation of the free exercise clause is not a good interpretation.
I'm curious about that judgment. When was that interpretation?
So the case was Kruger against the Commonwealth, which is a 1997 case. That's the most recent case where the free exercise clause has been considered. And in that case, it's known colloquially as the Stolen Generations case. So in that case, the plaintiffs, who were a number of Indigenous Australians, took the Commonwealth to court on the basis that their forced removal from their land negatively impacted their religious freedom in the sense of their connection to the land, which has a high spiritual value for Indigenous Australians. But the High Court said that the laws didn't expressly target freedom of religion in any way, even though the effect was to deny Indigenous Australians their religious freedom, because the terms of the law didn't explicitly target religious freedom. The law didn't contravene Section 116.
Seems like an incredibly tenuous link in that case to make that argument, but that the ramifications of the interpretation were far stronger.
Yeah, and I mean, and the court followed interpretation from earlier cases where Section 116 had been interpreted quite narrowly in the same way. So I mean, it wasn't a surprise in that sense. The decision it followed previous precedent, but of course that doesn't mean the precedent or the decision is right.
Yeah, definitely. So what's the future for the battle for religious freedom, the battle for, I guess, a faithful application of Section 116?
Well, I mean, what I've argued in my published work is that I think there will be a case that comes up soon in relation to Section 116. I think that's inevitable, given what we've seen in other jurisdictions, particularly in the area of same-sex marriage and anti-discrimination and religious freedom. I think eventually a case will work its way up to the High Court, and what I've argued is that the High Court then has an opportunity to change their doctrine on the free exercise clause, to give a more expanded interpretation, which probably takes into account that even general laws which don't expressly target religious freedom can have the effect of restricting religious freedom, and if those laws do that, then they should be invalid because they contravene Section 116. So I think there's an opportunity, and what will need to happen for the High Court to accept that, I think, is a robust scholarly work, and there are a few, including myself in this area, who are trying to do that scholarly work. Someone to bring the case, obviously, but as I said, I think that will happen. And I think there also needs to be a more popular understanding of what religious freedom is and what it entails. Even though judges...
Which is what we're working on right now.
Exactly. I mean, even though judges, in principle, don't have regard to community values and expectations when they make decisions, we all know that...
But the activist judiciary really does.
Yeah, they do.
They're more worried about the social outcomes than the legal accuracy.
Yeah. So I think if we change kind of the cultural milieu where religious freedom is discussed, then that might have an impact on any future decision. Obviously, the big battleground at the moment is freedom of religious schools, educational institutions, and the bill put by Senator Penny Wong to remove or amend negatively
Very
those
cynical
particular
piece
exemptions.
of legislation.
Yes. So I mean, that's something that I have/will be talking about in my published work as well. But I mean, the key thing to come out of it is that the particular bill that was went to a committee. The committee found that the bill was poorly drafted, poorly thought through. It had broader implications than what the issue was really about. So it would restrict religious freedom in a much broader way than just in relation to religious schools. And so the committee recommended that the bill not be pursued. And it's kind of taken a backseat at the moment, as obviously we have a federal election and more sort of pressing political issues come to the fore.
Yep.
But that's sort of where we are at there, despite people saying that there would be no impact on religious freedom from same-sex marriage. Religious schools would still be able to teach and to have an ethos consistent with whatever their doctrine is. It's quite clear we're starting to see moves encroaching on that.
Yeah, definitely. We'll watch this space.
For sure.
Now, I'm looking forward to hearing from you, I guess, expound this a whole lot more at the 2020 Church and State Summit.
Yes, I'm looking forward to contributing.
And I think we should probably do a live audience episode on this in the not too distant future, maybe in a couple of months.
Yep,
and
I'd love to do that.
get along an extra couple of people, maybe even an adversary who will take a negative view on the freedom of religion. But what should an average person? Is there a entry level, pedestrian level book for viewers who might want something on this, or further reading, viewing that they can do? Question without notice?
Yeah, I think I'd probably have to think about that. But the one thing that does come to mind...
If something comes to mind, we'll pop it in the links beneath in the description beneath the video. Yeah,
one thing I can think of right off the top of my head is Associate Professor Neil Foster from Newcastle University has an excellent law and religion blog.
Right.
So he blogs about pertinent religious freedom issues. He talks about other things as well, but also religious freedom. And that blog is robust. It can be quite technical in places, but it's not kind of at the level of an academic publication, and so it might be a bit more accessible for people.
Excellent. And if not, there's always Pellowe Talk.
Exactly.
And the Church and State events. Very good. Thank you very much. I appreciate you letting me pick your mind, Alex.
Thank you, Dave. It's been a great pleasure, and I look forward to next time.